So if you've played this game for longer than a week, I'm sure you've heard of Saryn. Saryn is a Warframe that has been loved by the community for years. She was released in 2016 and still to this day in 2025 she is one of the most played Warframes in the entire game. Last year in 2024 she was the 6th most played Warframe in the entire game, with her play rate increasing by 20%, solidifying her place as again the queen of DPS. If you're thinking of picking up Saryn, this is probably the best time, because in only a week worth from now there will be a new skin for Saryn, which is going to be her proto frame, and I'm sure that you've all seen her new skin. And if you're thinking of picking up this Warframe, I will tell you honestly, now is the best time. She has only gotten better with the recent changes and buffs made to her and to the game, and she by far has probably the best and the funnest weapon synergies any Warframe has. In 2024, her play rate was a 3.28%, and my aim for this video will be to make her play rate at least 4% by next year. I will explain every single ability that Saryn has in detail with their respective augments and how to fully unlock her potential and help her blossom regardless of whatever mission you're in or who your opponent is. There are a lot of guides on YouTube which talk about Saryn in detail. My guide will be a bit different because I build my Warframes differently. I'm a very lazy Warframe player and I will always prioritize comfort over anything else. DPS comes second, nuking rooms come second. The first thing for me is comfort. How comfortable am I playing this frame? Because I'll be honest, there's already enough games that we all need to sweat in, like Valorant or CSGO or Rainbow Six. You don't want to log onto Warframe and start sweating as well. This is a chill game, it's meant for chill play, and you shouldn't be spamming Molt or shields so you can shield tank the entire run, constantly worrying about if you're going to die or not. You should just be standing there with heaps of damage reduction, watching the enemies try to kill you and laugh. That is the Saryn build that I will be showing you today. Alright, before I start yapping, I know that players have a hard time making plat in the game, and I will be putting a guide out shortly on how you can make plat yourself as a Warframe player, because I understand that a lot of players nowadays are struggling or don't really understand the Warframe market to its full extent. If you want to watch that guide, if you want to learn how you can make plat, consider subscribing. I only aim to help you guys out and to help you better understand the game so you can enjoy the game to its fullest extent. So Saryn, just like any other Warframe, has 4 abilities, but the difference between her and a lot of other Warframes in this game is that all of her abilities synergize very well together, even her passive. Her passive increases all status durations by 25%. Whether it's from her abilities or the status effects are from weapons, they will all last 25% longer. This is really good for status weapon builds, as they rely on DOTs, which are damage over times, for their large damage output, especially paired with mods like galvanized status mods, which increase the overall damage by a small margin and help Saryn maintain any spread statuses. So her first ability, Spores. This is a tap ability that applies spores that deal corrosive damage on an enemy with a 50% chance to proc the corrosive status effect at base on that given enemy. When these spores are shot, they will detonate and spread to another enemy in a 16-meter radius. When these spores are spread to other enemies, the damage will start increasing in increments. Now, the initial damage that spores deal might seem quite insignificant, but trust me, this damage can ramp up to 5-digit numbers. However, if there are no spores left on any enemies, then the damage that you will have built up over the mission will start to decay at a 10% rate. Now, this is a very important part of Saryn, as when you're in endgame missions, Saryn's damage can get to very high numbers, and this damage is what is actually going to help you Nuke with her 4th ability, which I will explain later into the video. Saryn has 2 Spore augments. One is completely useless and I will not be talking about. The other one is called Venom Dose. Venom Dose will grant all allies within a 15-meter radius an additional 100% corrosive damage to their attacks for 40 seconds. Now, this is an additive damage buff. Saryn has a multiplicative damage buff, and I will explain the difference now. Additive damage buffs are added to your weapon's base damage. They don't multiply your final hit, they just take the base damage with mods and they add another layer of damage as whatever status damage type that the mod says. So in this case, you will add another layer of corrosive damage to every hit that you do, but this will not multiply your overall damage. The way multiplicative damage buffs work are they multiply the last final damage number that you do, and they multiply that by a certain percentage. This percentage could be converted into a times. So let's say Raw gives you a 30% damage buff. That means that your final hit damage, if it was 1000, will now multiply by 0.3, giving you an additional 300 damage on your final hit. If that didn't make sense, I'll go into more detail when I explain Toxic Lash, but I just wanted to help you understand how multiplicative and additive damage buffs work. Saryn's second ability is called Molt. Molt is something that a lot of people sleep on and tell you to replace with a subsume ability, but honestly it's not as bad as you think, especially for health tanking builds. Saryn sheds her skin, creating a decoy that is left behind with a 500 health pool. This decoy is initially invulnerable for the first 3 seconds, converting any damage it takes in that time frame to health. When the decoy is destroyed, it spreads a guaranteed toxin status effect in a 10-meter radius. This ability additionally gives Saryn a 50% movement speed increase for 5 seconds, which on the surface might not seem like a lot, but when you're in a sticky situation, it's a get out of jail free card. Saryn's Molt augment allows it to heal 50 health points per second for 10 seconds straight. 50 health might not sound like a lot when you have 3000 health, but this mod can scale with ability strength. Her third ability, Toxic Lash, applies a separate instance of damage to her weapons. Toxic Lash applies a 30% multiplicative damage buff to the total damage dealt. This ability is different from Rhino's Roar or Mirage's Eclipse because those multiplicative abilities will add to the total damage dealt, whereas Toxic Lash hits as a separate instance of damage. For example, if your weapon was to do 1300 damage at base, this ability will add an additional 300 toxin damage to your shot. This makes Toxic Lash one of the strongest damage buffers in the entire game, because not only are you getting a multiplicative damage buff as a separate instance of damage, you're further triggering toxin DOTs, which deal even more damage in time. For Augment, Contagious Cloud creates a cloud for any enemies killed that deal 300 toxin damage for 12 seconds. The damage is twice as strong for melee kills. In my opinion, this mod is a waste of a slot, as there are so many better mods that you can use on Saryn, and this mod ultimately ends up being a bad choice. Now I will say, I haven't really experimented with this mod much, so if anyone does have a good build for Contagious Cloud, please leave it in the comments below and I'll try it out, but as far as I'm concerned, this mod is big doo-doo. Miasma is Saryn's fourth ability. Miasma spreads viral damage across a wide area, causing enemies to take significantly more damage from all incoming sources. Miasma further boosts Saryn's damage by multiplying the damage of her spores by a staggering 4 times at base. Unfortunately, this doesn't scale with power strength, but if it did, I feel like it would break the game, so it's probably for the better that it stays at that 4 times. Miasma, as I mentioned before, significantly increases the damage of spores. The damage buildup of spores without Miasma is quite slow, and Miasma helps ramp that damage up at a very insane amount, allowing you to upkeep the damage and scale the damage whilst nuking effectively and efficiently. When it comes to subsume abilities on Saryn, her base kit is so strong that majority of the subsume abilities actually end up nerfing her. Molt is the ability that subsumed the most on Saryn. Now I think personally, Molt is actually a very good ability for Saryn. It helps you with shield gating builds because it's an instant cast, there's no delay, it gives you your shields back, it gives you a movement speed buff. For health tanking builds, it pulls aggro. Again, it gives you a movement speed buff, but it also helps you regen a lot of the health that you've lost. So overall, it's not a bad ability to use at all. However, when you get to the very end game missions, there are ways you can build her where you don't need a movement speed buff and the health regen. So we will eventually end up subsuming Molt for a better ability. Okay, so now that we've covered the basics, let's start talking about the builds. I will split this part of the video into 3 different segments. One will be builds for beginner players, the other one will be builds for intermediate players, and the last one will be builds for endgame players. I will only go into detail about the endgame build, because the intermediate and the beginner builds, there's not really much to go over. I will explain them very briefly, but the endgame build is the build I will be focusing on the most. I would also recommend you to watch the endgame build so you know what you're building towards. It will also help you get a better understanding of how this health tanking build actually works, so you can play around with it and you can change it however you would like. I will also talk about Archon Shards after I've explained all 3 builds, and then I will also go over some of the best and funnest weapon synergies that Saryn has currently in the game. So for the beginner friendly build, if your Saryn is not potatoed, this is the build you will opt for. With 44 points, you can put on Flow for maximum energy, Stretch, Continuity and Strength for the 3 Trinity mods, Redirection for Sustain, and the last slot is a Flex slot. Now I would recommend newer players to go for Venom Dose, which will help you do more damage overall with every weapon that you have, since I know new players sometimes can struggle with damage output, and Venom Dose will help you achieve the damage that you need. Now if your Saryn has an Archon Catalyst installed, which I call a potato, you can use this build. If you have any primed mods, you can use them in the regular mods replacement. This build might not look like it, but it can actually take you through a majority of the Steel Path content. This is a generic health tanking build for Saryn, with no Umbral Formers or expensive arcanes. Regenerative Molt is added for health regen. You replace Redirection with Vitality and Steel Fiber. Blind Rage and Overextended are added in place of Stretch and Intensify, and you're done. Now if you notice one thing, which I've done on purpose, I haven't upgraded Blind Rage fully for this build. This is to keep the energy efficiency at 55% to help with the energy sustain. I know new players don't have many ways to regen energy, but there are a lot of ways now to combat this issue. You can add a single Archon Shard to make energy orbs 50% more effective. You can add 2 to make them 100% more effective, effectively making every energy orb give you 50 energy instead of 25. You can use the Generic Operator class to help you with energy sustain. And lastly, if you have none of those things, you can go to the market and purchase 3 Arcane Energizers to make an R1 Arcane Energize, which should be enough to help you sustain your energy. Okay, now, this build is what I've been using for the past couple months. So this build follows the same premise as the health tanking build that I just showed for intermediates, but it uses more expensive arcanes and umbral mods. Firstly, the aura slot can be anything, and there are a lot of good options for Saryn. For Miasma, you can use enemy radar to find the best places to use Miasma. You can use growing power for an additional 25% strength. You can use Steel Charge if you're a melee addict and you're currently using the new Slam build meta. And lastly, I would recommend Corrosive Projection to make Saryn's corrosive spread go from 80% armor reduction to a whopping 98% armor reduction. Secondly, for her Exilis mod slot, you can really have anything or nothing at all. I haven't used an Exilis mod on Saryn for the longest time. I never really needed to put anything there because this build was already so good. But recently, I added Prime Sure-Footed because I kept falling on my ass in missions, and it's a good mod to avoid getting knocked down. This, in my opinion, is the best mod option that you have for her Exilis mod slot, because getting knocked down in high-level missions can almost kill you or reduce your damage significantly. If you don't have this mod, or you don't really care about getting knocked down, then you can opt for Power Drift for additional strength, Cunning Drift for additional range, or if you're an absolute Chad at this game, you could just use Thief's Wit. For the build, we will use 2 arcanes. One is for our health pool, which is Arcane Blessing. This will increase our health by 1200 when we collect 50 health orbs. The second arcane is Arcane Grace. This effectively allows Saryn to be immortal. But wait, I understand not a lot of players have Arcane Grace, so what I'll do is I'll give you the alternative, which isn't as good, but it gets the job done. The alternative is Arcane Molt Reconstruct. This arcane is not as good as Grace, as I've said before, but this will keep you alive due to the high usage of energy Saryn has. Miasma costs 75 energy at base. What this mod does is it gets the amount of energy that an ability would use at base without any mods, and it will convert it to health. And this conversion is a 6 times conversion at R5 Molt Reconstruct, which effectively means every time you cast Miasma, you'll be healing 450 health. We use 2 Umbral Formers to add all 3 Umbral mods, and add any other Formers that we need to slot every other mod on this build. Adaptation is a must, since the massive 90% damage reduction helps you with health tanking. We receive High Armor, which tops out our total damage reduction from armor 74%, and we use Eclipse as our subsume ability to further add an additional 25% damage reduction. Now this ends up making Saryn unkillable. quite literally. Even in high level missions like Archon hunts, she's able to tank a surprising amount of damage. Now this doesn't mean that she's completely immortal in any mission. In level cap runs, some enemies do 1,000,000 damage per hit, and 0.1% of 1,000,000 damage is still 1,000 damage. So when you're in level cap runs, you will still get hit pretty hard, but regardless, it's much more enjoyable than shield gating builds, and it's a good step in the right direction to help Warframes have another way of surviving than just to spam abilities for shields. So after saying all that, how do you play Saryn to her optimal ability? Well, first, keep Toxic Lash active at all times. It's a buff that should be consistently active in battle with virtually no downsides at all. It doesn't even mix with any singular elements on weapons, so it's amazing to have up at all times. Make sure to always have at least 10 enemies affected with Spores in different directions. The more enemies that have Spores, the higher the damage gets, and the lower the enemy armor, the higher the amount of kills that you have. Tap Spores on an enemy in a densely populated area, shoot the Spores, build up the damage, and once there's enough damage build up, use Miasma and nuke the room. Simple. Whenever you get low, or if there are too many enemies around you, use Molt, find a safer place to engage, re-engage, and nuke the room again. Now the best part of the build is that all of the nitty-gritty important bits have been fulfilled by just our mods and arcanes, and we have the 5 Archon Shards slots. Now if you're an endgame player, you should have enough Archon Shards to use. We've been spoiled with Archon Shards every week, so there's no excuse why you don't have at least 2 or 3 Archon Shards laying around for Saryn. But even if you don't, it doesn't really matter, this build still works amazing anyway. And for Archon Shards, you can literally add whatever you want. There are only a few that I would recommend, so I would recommend adding a Tau Forged yellow Archon Shard. That gives us 75% more effectiveness on energy orbs to help with that energy sustain. So after the one yellow Tau Forged shard that I recommend you slotting in, the rest does get a tiny bit complicated, so buckle in because I will talk for a tiny bit about Archon Shards. Recently we had a Jade update where Jade was released, and with Jade came a massive armor change to Warframe. The armor cap for enemies was reduced to 2,700, which was a drastic change because before, a level 200 heavy gunner had 10,800 armor before the update. This as a whole has made full armor strip not a hard requirement for Saryn anymore. This means that having a full armor strip Saryn build is not really needed technically, because corrosive stacks only give you up to 80% armor reduction, and an 80% reduction on 2,700 armor equals 540 armor which is left on the enemy, which is still a 64% damage reduction that the enemy has against you. In regular missions this is fine, as enemy health pools are really low, and 80% armor reduction is enough to kill even level 400 enemies which you will fight in Archon hunts. But in level cap runs, 64% damage reduction can be quite detrimental to your damage, because as enemy level scales, their health also scales, and there is no hard cap on enemy health, so enemy health can quite literally get up to like 500,000. So I would recommend running 2 Emerald Archon Shards if you're not using corrosive projection, but if you are using corrosive projection, you can just use 1 Archon Shard or none at all, because with corrosive projection alone, we take our armor reduction from 80% to 98%, which equates to 54 armor being left on the enemy, which is only a 12% damage reduction, and this is enough for level cap. I would personally recommend using corrosive projection instead of armor strip shards, because having the toxin emerald shards are much more viable and they increase your DPS significantly more because of how much damage Toxic Lash actually does. But if you want to use the full armor strip build on Saryn, you can. I personally would recommend against it if you're not really going for level cap runs, and just use corrosive projection because there is no better aura mod that you can use. But again, if you do want to use the double emerald shards for the full armor strip, then you can use the other aura mods that I recommended before in the video. The last 2 I use are to give me more health. Now the only reason I do this is so my Saryn can hit near 3k health, but you don't need to do this. You can add whatever else you want, whether that's casting speed or parkour velocity, whatever floats your boat, you can do that. A good way of staying alive right now is Dante spectres. Now a lot of people have talked about this for the past couple months, and if you guys didn't know, what you could do is you could have Dante as one of your spectres. Dante will cast the overguard ability for you, where every time you get a kill, you will get overguard. When Overguard breaks, you have a 0.5 second invulnerability window where you will take no damage, and with Saryn, because you'll be killing so much, you will always have this invulnerability window active. If you don't, then you'll always have Overguard on your Saryn. So that's another good way to survive if you're having any sort of survivability issues on Saryn. But with this build, even if the enemies go past the Overguard, you can still easily tank a lot of the damage before Arcane Grace reactivates. You start getting Overguard again, and Saryn again is unkillable. There are a lot of weapons that you can use on Saryn, and honestly you can use literally anything, because her Toxic Lash is such a strong weapons platform damage buffer that it doesn't even matter what gun you put on, because the Toxin DOT will quite literally kill everything. However, there are a few weapons that synergize very well with Toxic Lash. The first one being the Dual Ichors. The Dual Ichors synergy requires you to have the Arcane Adapter, and you get this Arcane Adapter from Steel Path to Fury Circuit. Once on, you will be able to transform this weapon when reaching a combo counter of 6 times. Once transformed, every kill with the Dual Ichors will create a Toxin Cloud, and any enemy standing near this Toxin Cloud will take Toxin damage. Now this is where Toxic Lash comes in. Toxic Lash is procced by the Toxin Clouds that the weapon leaves on the floor, which means that any enemy that walks into the Toxin Cloud will perish. And when that enemy does end up perishing, they will create another Toxin Cloud. Now this used to be an infinite cycle of damage, and you could nuke enemies 100 meters away, but they nerfed melee influence and how it works with Toxic Lash and the clouds, so it doesn't do that anymore. But needless to say, it's still a very, very overpowered synergy with Saryn, and the kill time on this is crazy. To use this build effectively, you need an arcane called Melee Influence. Melee Influence is an arcane that is used on a lot of weapons right now. Melee Influence, when activated, spreads melee status effects to all enemies within a 20-meter radius for 18 seconds. And when you pair Melee Influence, Toxic Lash, and the Dual Ichors together, room nukes. The Kuva Sobek is by far my favourite synergy with Saryn. Now this weapon used to be bugged, but I do believe that they've fixed this bug now. The Kuva Sobek has a mod called Acid Shells. When an enemy explodes on death, 450 corrosive damage, plus an additional 45% of the enemy's max health will be dealt as damage to all enemies within a 15-meter radius. Now the 45% health damage hit actually gets tanked by enemy armor, so it's not a very useful mod. However, this hit can actually proc a Toxin Lash proc. All Toxin status procs inflicted on the enemy that explodes will convert into one high damage Toxin proc and spread to all enemies within a 15-meter radius, killing them all very quickly. Now in high level missions, this Toxin damage is again tanked by armor, but there is an easy fix to this. Just cast Spores on the enemy before you're going to kill them. This will reduce enemy armor by 80% at max stacks, which is very easy to do. This lets Sobek melt any enemy, and if further damage is needed, you can cast Miasma, which increases the damage even further. Now I will say you can mod the Sobek in any way, just make sure that you have 2 Toxin mods on, because the Toxin mods help the Toxic Lash proc scale. And if you want to go even further, you can just add Raw to the build, and it's completely overkill. I wouldn't honestly recommend Raw because she can already nuke rooms, but if you want to use Raw, be my guest. The Sampotas is obviously in line with the current Slam meta builds that we have today. Now, the good thing about this Slam weapon is that with Saryn, it actually doesn't need any of the Nero mods, so you can actually leave your Warframe completely untouched, and you can just do all of the damage with just the weapon, 1 Arcane, and Toxic Lash. How does this work? You mod your weapon for slam damage, as any other slam damage weapon would be modded, but instead of adding melee influence, you will add melee afflictions, and when Toxic Lash is activated, when you do your slam attack, it will add heaps of toxin procs on the enemy. If the initial hit doesn't kill them, which it always does, the procs will do 2 million damage per tick on average. Slam builds right now are insanely broken. If you haven't jumped on them, I would highly recommend it because these builds are definitely getting nerfed soon. These are my 3 favourite synergies for Saryn right now in the game, and I don't think anything really beats these synergies. Saryn provides a very fast-paced game style, which is both fun and intuitive, and it demands you to keep an eye on certain factors when you're playing. It's not just you tap one ability and then you play and you don't do anything else. You constantly have to cycle, manage the map, make sure enemy armor is low, especially when you're in high level missions. Your armor strip for the entire team is amazing, and it's important to make sure that spores are spread throughout the map at all times, so the damage is always optimal and you're nuking as much as you can. Now, if you stuck around till the end of the video, I really appreciate your guys' support. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it helpful. I hope my way of playing Saryn is something new to you and something that you haven't really worked on yet. I am currently not in the best place in life right now. I am struggling financially. I have a lot of debts. My family kicked me out a couple months ago. I'm starting YouTube because 1, I love Warframe, and 2, I've always wanted to create content and put it out there. So if you want to support me, leave a like on the video, please subscribe. It means the world to me if I could start making content for Warframe. I might not be as good as all the other content creators, but I'll try to be as transparent and helpful for you guys as I possibly can. If there are any Warframes or any things that you would like me to make guides on, if I have the knowledge, I will make the guides for you, and I will try to help you guys as much as I can. Again, thank you for all the love and support. Thank you for watching the video, and I hope you guys have a blessed week. Until next time.